Dreams these days. The dream seemed to originate with me being in some sort of prolonged carpool with some professors from my old school SUU. The discussions we were having seemed to be geared toward causation of an observation, and I remember my point I was trying to make during the discussion wasn't going over very well. One of the professors, I'm certain, was Laurie Mauger. The other was up for question, likely being William Hayborn, though, being certainly male. We were driving through what seemed to be the desert in a four-door small vehicle, and a transition was made upon us stopping to fill up with gas. Upon wandering around the gas station for a while, we ended up picking somebody up who was bearing a remarkable resemblance to my cousin Keegan. For some reason or other, he was the one who was now driving, for reasons I would say due to tiredness of the other characters. The two professors now seemed to fade away and became obscure figures, overshadowed by the driver, who was having conversation with me. The bodies were still there, but it was like they were no longer who they once were. After driving for a minute, we passed a group of hitchhikers, and the driver made a pilot-in-command decision and pulled over to pick them up, even though there was grumbling going on among the rest of the passengers. I seemed to be okay with the decision, once it is that I saw that the majority of the hikers were women my age, LOL. Though, as if the dream were taunting me, it made them close enough for awareness, but didn't give me what I wanted, to sit next to and be able to talk to them. For as soon as we were picking them up, the car somehow shifted and became more of a crossover type, and it now had one additional row in front of me that didn't allow me to near the vicinity of our new passengers. The focus of the dream quickly changed, though, when I got an email on my cell phone, and it was from our driver. I do think I remember telling him to keep his eyes on the road, but he was being a loudmouth, too busy in exaggerated conversation to care. The email itself was in regards to a very traumatic experience that he had had during his mission that he had went on to Brazil. While reading it, it was like I was transported to the experience myself, and was reliving it as I read the words. The transition was fluid, and to a degree the scenario I found myself in was relatable to what had happened up to this point, but with some very obvious differences. First of all, in this experience, I wasn't a male, nor in any way did I resemble the figure who had sent me the email, who was the one who had went through the event, supposedly. I was also now in third-person perspective of myself, watching myself from different angles while going through it firsthand. I found myself as a young mulatto girl with a freckled face, dark hair, slender build, naked, in what seemed to be an outhouse in the middle of a swamp, where the floor to my tiny containment cell was made of ice. Presumably, I guess, I was in some jungle swamp in Brazil, for as soon as I made my initial escape from confinement by breaking through the ice, though I remember plunging through the broken ice into the warm, thick, and mud slush below, I saw myself jumping out of the side of the now seen floating porta potty anchored in the middle of nowhere. As soon as I had jumped, a panther of some kind jumped after me, that was then frightened off by another lighter in color big cat. Crocodiles were spooked as I half swam and pushed my way through the slurry of material. The two big cats, now both in pursuit, were hot on my tail, and it seemed I was making some sort of tunnel through the material that they were hurrying through to me. I knew I had to do something, so I grabbed a big stick, and for some reason or other, I was able to collapse my trailing tunnel by puncturing the ceiling of it with my stick, and the lungs of the big cats were now filled with the slurry of muck that we were in. The cats were now off my tail, and the scenario then changed quite drastically in setting and dangers. The water was no longer a sweaty, viscous mire, but was now crystal clear. I had to be very quiet, moving through the water, because I was now having to avoid being seen by people, The ones who had imprisoned me, I suppose. I had one more obstacle to overcome, though, and during this moment, the most clear picture of a true representation of image within the dream was before me. The colors, the behaviors of animals, and their motions, with an obvious exception to come up. I was suddenly aware of a very toxic fish that I knew was in the area, but I knew the trick to get past it. I dove down into the water, holding my breath all the while, and there was a plate on the bottom of this grotto. On the plate was a syringe, and a few other fish were somehow confined to the area. I took the syringe and drew some of my blood, and injected it into this very clear-looking butterfly type of fish. Upon doing so, it attracted two smaller fish, who were then swimming in and out of the blood-filled fish. I then released this fish, having the two interacting fish near the toxic fish I had to get past. I remember reasoning with myself during this moment to justify the events, as if to make them real. I remember thinking, the plate and other items must be down here so the captors have a way of making it past the danger to come, but looking no further than that. Upon releasing the distractor fish in front of the small toxic blackfish, the two fish popping in and out of the blood-filled fish's mouth were then popping in and out of the toxic fish's mouth, keeping it at bay through this cycle of exchange. I then swam on, and finally made it to a sort of docking station, and climbed up and out of the water, and I guess I had escaped, but when I confronted the mob boss, so to speak, right there on the pier, it was as if I was one of his employees or something, in the way I was being spoken to, not even noticing my nudity. I had climbed out of the water right next to this lady, processing maggots, and I had gotten covered in these maggots during the process. The kidnapper looked at me and disgusted told me to clean myself off, go take a shower, and that was it as he walked away. He was nicely dressed in a place that looked like it was right out of National Geographic. Tribal people were all around, as the dream within a dream, while not seeming so, suddenly but without notice faded away. I was then back in what seemed to be more of a van than a car or crossover, and the same driver was at the wheel, but had managed to change in appearance, being much more evil looking from the moment I had entered into the scenario before, being now back where I was. The setting felt and looked like one of the many times I was on my way to float down the Green River with my extended family. I remember the driver then saying something about a kidnapper who loved luring people into vans by telling them they were going on vacation. I then thought, this dude's been through some trauma, and we are about to have been also. The dream then holding on to the vacation theme more than anything, as I was then on a prolonged journey with my brother Weston and this girl Katrina, who we had met down at school and went on a lagoon trip with once. She has a real Stranger Things type look going for her. Well, not much about where we went or what we did was very clear, and it was like we were back to where we lived before we left, which was this massive interconnected complex that seemed to house only students, but didn't seem like any of us were going to school. Like we were all there for camp, but there was no organized camp directory, as if we all just lived there. But it had a feeling like this wasn't our true home, and we were all only there to socialize. The place had a real earthy vibe to it, like it was filled with smoke and was dark, well furnished, with the furniture having been there forever, almost a must, but everyone was comfortable, where the smoky nature of the place almost overwhelmed the age of it, and the smell that entails. But the visuals of the age gave it a proper feeling, and the smoke canceled out the effects of age on the materials present, that were very well worn, but would have otherwise been unpleasant if it wasn't for the smoke, allowing all together for the place to feel really interesting, dark but known, full of secrets, but nothing stunk, very comforting, full of activity, and with a history stretching back further than anyone there. This might sound odd, but it almost felt Canadian, like it was some cabin up in the woods, isolated but warm with company. I remember wandering around this place, looking for my room forever, and each new section that I went into had different people doing different things. I remember stumbling into my roommate Nate, and along the way running into a guy that was making eggs. He told me that while I was here, anything I could find to eat was free game, and I could use all the amenities to cook my food or whatever. It felt like being in an Airbnb for that moment. I then remember confronting my brother Weston, and he told me how I had totally weirded out Katrina, but for some reason she had written me a personal letter, but I never got it. Like she was attracted to me, but circumstantially I was very unattractive in regards to extra-personal observation and socio-analysis. The whole thing grew very fuzzy, and while the dream faded out and I came to, I remember having a very vivid image drawn that I was navigating into. It grew as I moved through it. I thought, why can't I draw like this when I am awake? Then thinking about my situation with women, and how I longed for what I reminded myself I hated, wanting to then rage against condemning pictures painted of me having gone through this wild ride, being an animal that needs to be locked up in a cage. Well, the animal is only wild when it is caged, is it not? For before, while it was free, it was nothing more than what fit in with where it was, now only called wild, once in a place where the once suitable behavior, or where it was, is no longer. I woke up feeling ready for battle. Dreams these days.